We're good. All right. All right. I call to order this meeting of the Issaquah School Board. Maybe no, it's not me. Okay. Today is Thursday, August 25th. The board has been in an executive session related to legal matters. That went to 5:40-ish. And then we went into another executive session related to collective bargaining that was extended about 10 minutes. And so at this point, would everybody please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right. We are at public input, and today we have the opportunity to have an introduction of some of our new administrators that are going to be out in our buildings and here in admin. So I will turn it over to you to get us started with that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good evening. The first new administrative hire I'd like to welcome in the position of Executive Director of Middle Schools is Sherry Cox. Sherry has been and has served middle school students and staff for over 18 years as a teacher and a school leader. In her 24 years in public education, she's worked tirelessly as an advocate for equity in multiple school districts. She's excited to bring her experiences from multiple districts to Issaquah School District, and I'm very pleased to be working with her. So
Thank you, Superintendent Tauyig.
Wonderful. You can meet the board. Yeah, shake hands. Yeah. Yeah. And we will make sure that you have an opportunity to get to know board members and more members of the community as we continue the school year. Thanks. With that, we have some additional, many actually, new administrative introductions. And so I'll pass it over to Susan Mundell next, Executive Director of Elementary Schools, to go through some of the next introductions. And then you can just pass it off to the next person doing introduction. That would be great.
Sounds good. Good evening, school board directors and Superintendent Kalyuk. I'm Susan Mundell, Executive Director of Elementary Ed. And tonight I'd like to introduce Amy Butson. Come on up, Amy. Amy is the new assistant principal at Issaquah Valley Elementary School, and she's excited to begin her work at the elementary level after having served as a PBSES coach at Pacific Cascade Middle School. And we look forward to benefiting from her expertise in this area, as well as her overall skill and enthusiasm for serving all kids and families in Issaquah. Amy?
Thank you. I am so excited to be part of the IVE community. I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know all of the staff the last couple of days, and we are super excited to be welcoming back our kids next week.
And second, next, I'd like to introduce to you Sean Cornwall, who's the new assistant principal at Creekside Elementary. Several years ago, Sean moved to Washington from Arizona, where he received his administrator credential. He first served in the Issaquah School District as a teacher in the science technology program. And then for the past 4 years, he's been the dean at Newcastle Elementary. In partnership with his now principal, Amy Allison at Creekside, they make up an educational technology dynamic duo. So I'm pleased to welcome Sean to the assistant principal role.
Thank you, Susan. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Issaquah School District Board of Directors and Superintendent Tauyig for this opportunity. It has been amazing this last week with all the staff coming back and their excitement for working and preparing the school for students coming back has been amazing. Just seeing their excitement has got me excited. I look forward to having students come and the months to come and working with students and the family and community of Creekside. Thank you.
Well, good evening again. My name is Sherry Cox, the Executive Director of Middle Schools, and it's my honor to introduce the new principal at Issaquah Middle School, Mr. Mark Jurgens-Mata. Come on up. Also known as Mr. Jay-Z, Mark is a proud father of a first grade son who attends Issaquah Valley Elementary. and Mark is starting his 24th year in education. And prior to this assignment, he was a middle school math and high school math teacher for 14 years in Virginia, Georgia, Florida, and Washington. He was a vice principal at Eastside Catholic School for a year and a half before making headlines for marrying his husband. Mark served as the associate principal and athletic director at Mercer Island High School and then as the AP at Issaquah High School. One of Mark's strengths is building relationships with students, as was evidenced by students throughout this area walking out of schools in support of Mr. Jay-Z and marriage equality. I am excited to collaborate with Mark in this new role as the proud principal of Issaquah Middle School. Welcome, Mark.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be leading Issaquah Middle School this year. The past 5 years have been right across the street at Issaquah High School. I'm very excited to be neighboring with all these veteran, wonderful high school students and hopefully shaping the minds and just making that school just as wonderful as it possibly can be. We've had just a wonderful week and we are very, very excited to start the school year next week. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to this school year.
Hello, I'm Andrea Zier, Executive Director of High Schools. I have 7 new people to introduce. So my brevity with introducing them is not because I love them any less than my counterparts, but to get through the evening quickly. So first, I'm going to start at Liberty High School. We have Danielle Zielinski, who's coming on as a new assistant principal at Liberty High School. This is Danielle. You can come on up, Danielle. This is Danielle's 9th year in the Issaquah School District, but her going into her 6th at Liberty. She served for 5 years as the athletic director at Liberty High School, and she has 2 small kiddos, and she is very excited about digging into the work with Liberty. Yep.
Hi. I appreciate the opportunity as well to stay in my building. That's pretty cool. And to learn a new role. It's been a fun and challenging week just to get to know staff and just kind of in a different setting. And I'm excited to support students and staff alike. And it's been great calibrating with our admin team so far. So thank you.
All right, next up for Liberty High School, I am excited to introduce Andy Brownson as Liberty's new principal. Andy served as an English teacher for 8 years and then 1 year as an athletic director. And then he spent the last 7 years as an assistant principal here in the ISD at both Skyline and Liberty. He is a lifelong Coug, go Cougs, and he absolutely loves being a part of the Liberty community.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. There's 2 real feelings that I'm feeling right now. One is just a great humility to be able to lead the high school and the community where I live. I never thought I'd have the opportunity to continue in the role of principal at Liberty High School. So the other emotion I'm really feeling is I'm fired up because I've been in high school my whole career. And anyone who's been in high school will tell you that there's 2 parts of the school year that are the very best. Graduation, when you get to see your kids get that diploma. That's what it's all about. But the other cool part and the best, I think sometimes the best week of the whole year is that first week of school, because that's where you get to welcome those new kids, our new patriots into the building, which is so fun to see them come with their wide eyes and to get to welcome the kids that you already know back in. And just that opportunity that exists, that somewhere between them walking in the doors and them walking across that stage, you've got a chance to make an impact. So I'm really fired up. Thanks for this opportunity and go Pates.
All right, now we're going to move over to Issaquah High School. The first new assistant principal I'd like to introduce is Kelly Kraft. Kelly spent 11 years as a language arts teacher, and she's worked in both the private, public, and international school sectors. She's a RTI expert, and she also had experience as an athletic coach. So Kelly, welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. This seems like a really special school district, and IHS is a special place. I'm excited to learn and grow as an administrator, and the families that I've met so far have a really palpable optimism for the school year, and I'm excited to be a part of that. So thank you.
next up is a new assistant principal at Issaquah High, which is Carrie Ann Eveland. Carrie started teaching in 2000. She has a master's in secondary curriculum and instruction. She's moved around a lot and been in a lot of different states and different education programs due to a spouse in the military. So she has all kinds of ideas from different states that she's able to bring to us. But she's really excited to put roots down here in the Pacific Northwest. So welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. I am really excited to be here. So I'm just want to offer my gratitude and to say that the reputation that Issaquah had before I arrived was for kindness and professionalism. And I have just been overwhelmed with what an understatement that reputation was. So I'm really excited to be here and feel very much at home. So thank you.
And then still at Issaquah High, we've got another new assistant principal named Leah Hernandez. Leah actually began after getting her master's degree work in the foster care system and then went on to get a master's in special education. She has a focus on emotional behavior and autism. She's also been an instructional coach, but she's really excited to bring all those skills and help kids here in Issaquah. So welcome, Leah.
Oh, thank you all for having me. I feel really humbled to be here, and this position means a lot to me and my family so much. And I have passion for working with marginalized kids from different sectors of the school, and I'm excited to bring my background and knowledge in those areas to the whole community and learn in a new way how to use it collectively for everybody. So thank you again, and I'll see you soon.
All right, now we're heading over to Skyline. So a new assistant principal at Skyline is Kevin Adamo. Kevin has been a teacher in the state of Michigan, where he also was an athletic coach, an athletic director, assistant principal, and a principal. But 4 years ago, he moved here from Michigan to Washington to be closer to family. And he's been working in our middle schools here in the ISD. But now we've brought him up to Skyline to be an assistant principal. And we're really excited to have him. And he's just as excited to be here. So welcome, Kevin.
Good evening. I just want to, first of all, just thank you for this opportunity. I am honored. I am pumped to be here back into administration. I picked a heck of a 4 years to go back into the classroom, but it was also very good, though. It really was to reconnect me with the classroom. So, and I enjoyed it very much. And I will say that before moving out here, I did some pretty heavy research into districts, and Issaquah is the district that I wanted, and everything worked out perfectly and smooth. And I think that was just a great sign that I was in the right place and where I need to be. And I'm excited to be at Skyline and a part of that family there. Kids coming in this week got me up the next level and pumped. It's like, bring them in. And staff, everyone has been so awesome. And everyone, my past 4 years here in Issaquah, it's a phenomenal district, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yep, still me again. So our last one, last but certainly not least, we have Allison Straight. She also moved to our state 4 years ago from Hawaii. She was prior to coming to ISD this year, she's been primarily in the North Thurston schools in the last few years. And she was an educator in Hawaii, but she's really just excited to be here and recently moved to our area. And so dealing with moving and becoming a new administrator, but she's ready to go for next week. So welcome, Allison.
So I am really excited to be here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I was able to visit the state of Washington, specifically Issaquah, a year before I moved to Washington myself, and just really appreciated this community. My friend lives here, and it's just so beautiful. And when we moved to Washington, I knew that eventually this would be a place that I would like to be a part of as well. So really happy for that. And Skyline has been so welcoming. My principal and the rest of the admin team, they've been really supportive, and I can't thank them enough, because it's a big deal coming into a new environment. And Skyline's a really big school. Like Kevin said, we have students in the building painting signs and hanging them. Our PTSA has been there to serve breakfast for us a couple of times. And it just feels good. It feels really good to be there. So I'm very happy, very excited, and just really thankful for the opportunity.
All right, that was a lot of administrators. And I see we still have a couple more to come at our September board meeting.
That's right. I'm thrilled to welcome all the new administrators, and I've gotten to know them through different forums, also from some one-to-one time, which I've deeply appreciated. So I'm fired up and pumped alongside you. Welcome.
That's right. They are ready to go for next week. I'm excited about that. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. All right. All right, I wrote down all those names. All right, now we are on to the rest of public input. We will take public input. I have a couple names on a piece of paper, and then for anybody on Zoom that wants to do public input, go ahead and raise a hand. We'll start with in the room. This is an opportunity for public input on items not already scheduled for discussion on our meeting agenda. This agenda item is for community input. I just said that on items not on our agenda. I don't know why I have it written here twice. I think I've done this more than once. Need to fix it. If you have input relating to a specific agenda item, please hold it until we request at that item. As a general rule, the board will not respond to public input. I ask that you clearly state your name and school attendance area, limit your comments to 2 minutes, and we have someone using a timer here. The board neither endorses nor censors any opinions expressed in public input. Please keep all comments civil and respectful, and no comments or applause from the audience, but do feel free to wave your hands, and I indicate that when I see it. So I appreciate that. So we will start with Michelle Whitehead.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Michelle Whitehead. My attendance area is Grand Ridge Elementary. I'm a parent of a 9-year-old daughter living in the district of Sydney Mullings. I'm here to make public comment about the lack of respect, dignity, integrity, and communication that this district safety director, Dave Montalvo, and board member Sydney Mullings has had for its constituents. On June 1st, I attended a public meeting regarding school safety presented by Jill Ravenscraft and Dave Montalvo at Grand Ridge Elementary. The timing of this meeting was after the tragedy of Uvalde, Texas. The meeting was only an hour, and parents were not allowed to record this meeting and were only allowed to take notes. I then proceeded to take 6.5 pages of notes and was writing as fast as I could. The presentation was given by Dave Montalvo, happened to be nearly the same exact information explained on the school district safety website. On the website, there's an embedded YouTube video of Dave Montalvo describing almost everything he presented during the safety meeting. Hence, no reason why the meeting could not have been recorded. This meeting was an opportunity to ask questions about safety at Grand Ridge. I asked several questions. I had alarming answers and bizarre comments to my questions. I think the public would be very interested to know that the safety plan for an intruder, they are calling it, not an active shooter, is that in the event this happens, that certain Grand Ridge staff, executive staff, must then use walkie-talkies, get a hold of Dave Montalvo or his assistant, Neil Lasser. One of the two of them will be directed to link to 911 and henceforth will take over any and all communications between Grand Ridge and 911 dispatcher. Dave Montalvo will then be driving to Grand Ridge in the only vehicle supplied by ISD. He'll be coordinating with police in the school district to describe the scene, relay what police presence is needed, what level of threat there is, and all at the same time, once Dave Montalvo or Neil Lasser arrives on the scene at Grand Ridge, they will be securing the perimeter. At the same time, he will be communicating the comms person at the district level to get the information released to the public. I asked only why walkie-talkies. His answer was not to jam up the 911 system, take resources away from their dispatch system that I have since learned they only share with Snoqualmie Police Department.
Thank you for your input. If you have a longer piece, you can email it to us and we'll be happy to read that.
I have, thank you. Please consider us for DCAC. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ayanna Meisner.
Hi, my name is Ayanna Meisner from the Issaquah High School boundary, and I'm here to express my extreme disappointment and lack of leadership regarding the suspension of Coach Doug Crandall 10 months ago. In about an hour, you're going to discuss a document. It's titled The Treatment of People. In it, it says, transparency is the honest, continuing effort to help members of the school community to obtain and understand non-confidential information and understand the reasons for and process behind decisions. That must be a joke. When Coach Crandall was suspended, we received no explanation or information. We made phone calls, we wrote emails, we came to board meetings, anything we could think of to find answers. all of our attempts were met with silence. We persevered, demanding to know what process was being followed, when the investigation would start, begging for a timeline, anything that would help our daughters wrap their heads around the abrupt mid-season dismissal of their beloved coach. The first hint of any real information we received was on the March 10th board meeting, when Director Moore said, "We need to continue to allow the internal investigation to continue, and it will wrap up, and we will be able to proceed from there." That was in March. I firmly believe there was never any intent to investigate, but our amazing United basketball community forced your hand. We were so happy when it finally started. There would soon be answers and a resolution. However, with the investigation completed over 3 months ago, we still have had no communication, no transparency. You've heard from us, you've heard from our daughters. We have heard nothing from you until today. We were told a decision had been made. Coach Crandall will not be reinstated. What was the purpose of dragging this out for 10 months, knowing you never had any intention to listen to us, work with us, or help us? This non-existent process that kept being discussed caused harm to our children, the children whose job it is for you to protect. Shame on all of you for the unbelievable lack of leadership, lack of communication, and complete absence of transparency. The cruelty you have shown us, Coach Crandall, and most importantly, our daughters, is unforgivable.
Thank you for your input, and I see the hands waving. Ken Sunderland?
I've been a parent in this school district for 11 years, and the coaching suspension of Doug Crandall is the one and only time I've crossed paths with the leadership of the ISD. I believe strongly in principle, and this case was a travesty of justice and unfair retribution by a parent who was slighted when their daughter was not made a captain of the girls' basketball team. That is surely their right, especially if they felt aggrieved. But it is also the job of the school administration, and in this case, the HR department, to recognize the retaliatory nature of the complaint and not punish a coach and an entire team for one family's disappointment by a coaching decision. So here we are 9 months later, an investigation completed, and miraculously just today, a decision was finally made. With the exception of Sydney, my family's experience with the ISD leadership has been heartbreaking. The process involved with Coach Crandall's suspension had no plan, no leadership, and no integrity. I've seen people crying in this room as players and parents describe the pain you've willingly endorsed with your inaction to right this terrible miscarriage of justice. The superintendent will stand before us tonight to present the EL2 report and claim that our district will build trust through transparency. And on page 9, the report goes on to say that the school community is to understand the reasons for and process behind the decisions. I'm here to tell you that is a lie. Our entire program has been kept in the dark from the beginning, and you continually put the lawyers ahead of our daughters. The ISD HR department, and especially its leadership, cannot be trusted. And I think it's extremely important for this board to recommend better training and oversight in the future. We as a district have to do better. The kids have to come first. Now we've lost the best coach our girls have ever had, and Issaquah Valley Elementary has lost their kindergarten teacher of the year. This is truly a sad day, and you could have changed it with a little courage. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your input, and I do see the hands waving. And we also have Dan Gibbons.
Good evening. I'm Dan Gibbons. I have 2 daughters in the Issaquah School District. Annie will be a junior and Clara will be a freshman at Issaquah High this year. Both of them play basketball and have been coached by Doug Crandall. I'm here for 2 reasons. The first, to express my extreme disappointment with ISD's decision to not reinstate Doug as head coach of the girls basketball program. And 2, to request that an audit and evaluation of HR practices at ISD be conducted. ISD and this board have done a disservice to the girls. Girls here tonight have been waiting for Coach Crandall to be reinstated, including the incoming class of freshmen like my daughter. All of you on this board have heard numerous speeches from parents, the girls themselves espousing the positive impact Doug has made on their lives. All of you on this board have received numerous letters from parents and the girls asking for the reinstatement of Coach Crandall. These impassioned pleas have been met with anemic responses like, "I am not at liberty to discuss the details of this HR matter." As a parent and a taxpayer, I'm extremely disappointed at how the ISD conducted itself. Clearly, the best interests of our girls was not front and center. Makes me wonder what was. Which leads me to the second reason why I'm here today, to request a thorough audit and evaluation of ISD's HR practices be conducted. How did this happen to Doug? Who at ISD is accountable? What policies did that person follow? And what oversight role does this board have to ensure proper HR practices are followed? These are questions I demand be answered and made visible. During the investigation of Doug, my daughter was interviewed. She was asked 2 questions, which didn't allude to anything that would have justified removing Coach Crandall. ISD and this board have done a disservice not only to the girls' basketball program, but to all sports programs in this district. You have removed a highly qualified, effective, and caring coach.
Thank you for your input. And I see the hands waving. Thank you. I appreciate all of your comments. Stephen, is there anyone on Zoom? If you pop it up so I can see the name. Marcel Waldman. So Marcel, if you can turn on your video, there you are.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, I guess I could lower my hand now. Okay, I actually just wanted to come on and say thank you so much to the transportation department. This morning, some of us at Cougar Mountain Middle School, Tallis residents woke up to find out we were not going to have buses up here for our students to get to school. And we wrote in, and immediately we were met this evening with a great letter from the district saying, after all the safety concerns that we sent in, that we have received a bus route. So I just wanted to say thank you for the swift action taken by the transportation department today.
Thank you very much for your input. I'm glad this worked out.
Thank you.
All right. And Stephen, that was the only one I see. All right. Then we will move on. We are now on the approval of the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, everyone said aye, and that passes. Are there any changes to our regular agenda? For you guys, any changes? All good.
No.
All good. All right, then we will move on to our first item on our agenda. So we had a board retreat on August 23rd, and our retreat was here in this room on that day from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. So we had a long day, but we got a lot of good things done. And I'm going to do kind of a high level run through of some of the things that we did, and then others can join in and add anything they would like. Most of our time was spent reviewing our policies, both to see what we do in practice. Does it match what our policies say? And for our policies, do we have any changes that we would like to make in our policies? And we've come up with some tweaks to our policies, and all of this will come through for a first read, hopefully at the next board meeting, and then action at the one following that. So the very specific language will all eventually come before the board and the public. But the first part we did was review our BSLs, and we had John Welsh from the Puget Sound Educational Service District at Puget Sound ESD to help us kind of work through that. A BSL, thank you. I actually have it written out. It's a board superintendent linkage policy, which is about our how we interact and delegate authority to our superintendent. It basically defines our relationship. And as we were saying, it's super important. Our BSL 1 is key because it's the board's sole official connection to the operational organization. Its achievements and conduct will be through our superintendent. And so that really defines the board is at the policy level, and our superintendent is our only link to the operations of the organization. So going through the BSLs, we found a few kind of smaller tweaks that we'll end up working on. After that, we went through our OGPs, which are operational governance policies. These are a little bit more of our legal, they came from the 1000s of policy. We definitely are going to make a few changes through those. One of the things we talked about had to do with audience participation in OGP 1. And we're going to really try to reground ourselves in actually what we had in the policy relating to wanting to hear from the community, particularly around the times where we're working on things on our agenda that ultimately will come to a vote. And so we're going to try to change up some of the language to try to help move any kind of public input to the very beginning of our meeting, except for those items that actually have action that will ultimately be taken, and those will be indicated on the agenda. So it's actually trying to get us a little bit back to where we used to be and what our policy says. And for the community, they can always email the board because we always read all of that. Some of this will streamline how we do it in a meeting. And that would still give people the opportunity to speak at our meetings and to email us information. We have some of the language we'll work on. In OGP 6, the new director district boundaries, we need to add the language to that. We had approved the maps back in June. We're going to clarify some information around new director orientation and possibly add a GP over the mentor so we can define that mentor role. And then we looked and reviewed our GPs, which are our governance process, which kind of defines our role and what we do. And we had some tweaks there, not too many, but some of it we were kind of consolidating the authority of the president as far as appointing board members along the continuum of things that we end up having them do, the audit and financial things like that. The board completed its training about the Open Public Meeting Act and the Public Records Act. There were videos that we all watched, and then we had a discussion, kind of talked about how we want to continue to do public input, which is to keep it as available as possible. So we're going to keep our Zoom going so that we can take remote input during our regular board meetings, but for our work study type time and our SIPs and retreats where those will go back to just being in-person meetings. Those are no public input meetings in the first place. We also discussed our town halls and are going to work on having 3 this year, maybe north, south, and a remote. We're working on dates, and that will become our challenge, but we'll work on that some more later. And then lastly, we got to meet with our student reps, which was very exciting. We got to meet 6 out of our 8, but at some point, Sydney, can you send us the names of all of our students? Because that will be awesome. And I'm sure they're going to be here for our next meeting. So we'll have to make sure we have not only student rep on the agenda, but a little bit more time because we want to have them each introduce themselves and tell us a little bit, right? So that the community also gets to know who our student reps are. And then one other idea that we all had gotten thrown out was as we were going through this year and monitoring and going through our ELs to take a second step, which was to review our interpretation. It's the superintendent's interpretation, but we have a new superintendent. So we'll have to figure out how we get that sequence in there, whether we do them in the regular meetings, we do them in some work study time, but to go back through and review that interpretation and see if it still fits or if you want to make any adjustments to those. So I think that was a good idea. And then the last idea that I made a note of that was talked about was maybe producing some board videos. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later too, because I want a board member that wants to kind of spearhead that one. So we can go from there. So it was a very long day, but we got through a lot of good work looking at our policies. We talked about some topics that will probably be on our September 20th retreat, and we're going to work on that so we can figure out how we get the information that we need for that particular day of work as well. So I'll throw it out to any comments about our day.
Well, it was a long day, but I think it was important that we go through all the policies. It's actually in policy that we do it every year, but we had that pesky pandemic, which kind of sucked up a lot of board energy. But I think it was particularly important that we went through the policies in conjunction with our new superintendent, because I think it really grounds the whole board superintendent team in what we do, how we do it. And in the few cases where what we do is a little bit different than what's in policy, do we change policy or do we change what we do? So I feel like it was a good opportunity to really immerse the six of us in the business of the board, which is policy, policy governance. So thought it was a productive day.
I think it was work only a school board member could love.
Yeah.
There was no treat and retreat. It's
No
it's
treat and
typical.
retreat, but a long
and-
day's meeting.
And I think it's one of those things of what do school board members do? And this is much of it is to go through and look at what are our policies. And many of those are how do we relate to one another? How do we relate to the public? And it's in those conversations that we're making sure that we're in alignment, that we say what we do and do what we say. And I think that that's really an important part. And it is part of the transparency. It is a part of making sure that what we do go through processes. And what are those processes? And are we maintaining them? And I think we haven't had the opportunity to go through these over the past 2 years. Many of our board retreats have been about the immediate action necessary. And so it was good to take some time to go back to doing what we need to do, which is review. Are we operating in the manner that we say we're supposed to?
So on the policy side, I'm pretty wonky. So it's interesting, but it's also interesting as the newest board member, I think, to having read them maybe academically at the start of my tenure and going back now with a lot of different times and reasons we've needed to leverage those policies to say,
This is why we have it.
either this is why we have it, or this is what we're not doing, or this is where my experience is deviated. So I think that's really important work to just get settled in maybe some of those things we haven't had time to dig into in the last few years, which is great. I certainly, as much as I loved all of that, I'm most excited about being able to start our newly launched student rep program and having student representatives as very close consultative members of our process in policy, and being able to welcome, having 6 of them being able to join us before the start of the school year was really exciting. Allow them to meet the full board as we went through our review and selection process. Those students had only interacted with the 2 of us. So it was nice to kind of have everyone meet them. Our students are just phenomenal. And I think they put on display pretty immediately their interest in the depth of what we do, our relationships to other city government agencies, et cetera. The questions they asked were pretty cool. And so, just to restate, they will each be having policies we're governed by that they dig into deeply, that they'll be working with their peers in their high schools in order to bring back student feedback on how the policies are showing up or realized in their school building and helping us through that monitoring as we go forward. So I'm just thrilled about getting to relaunch a really different way to engage with students in this process.
Well, we are excited for our students to be a part. Superintendent?
So I want to say thank you to the board. It was a full day. I don't know if I would call it a long day, although it was maybe in duration long, but it was a full day of what I thought were intentional, meaty, and reflective topics. The highlight for me was to actually not only learn about our policy governance model, but also learn about each board member and to be a part of the conversation as part of the board superintendent team. And for me, it certainly helped me internalize and know more about history and context. And so I enjoyed that intellectual and interpersonal dialogue. I told my husband that I feel like I lucked out. This is like a dream job for me. And I really lucked out in having such amazing board members and to be here in Issaquah. So thank you. And the highlight was also at the end of the day, the students who asked incredible questions and insightful, thoughtful questions. And I know one of the things that I shared about my hopes for what might come of student representatives being highly engaged in our governance process and with the board is that someday they consider their role more officially. And I've seen that happen in the course of my career. And it's just a pride moment where young people then take on the mantle and leadership next. So it was a great and full and fulfilling day. So thank you.
Excellent. I'm not sure where Harlan is, but. Oh, he's right there. Oh, I see. Working on the computer. Got it. Yeah, so it was a great day and we have some work to do afterwards. Suzanne's already working on edits and she's going to share that out with the rest of the board. We'll give her a little feedback if we have any, and then we'll start moving it through so that we can get those policies approved here up at the dais. All right. All right. That took care of that one. Next, we are on to works in progress and update on preparation for the start of the school year. Very exciting next week.
It is next week. I'm very excited. So I'll share some updates of where we are in preparing for the start of the school board. And excited to just sort of share some highlights. But I'm going to start with my experience getting a tour from some PCMS 8th graders. I showed up and I saw that kids were going to be on campus doing transitional tours and I asked for one. They did give me the tour as though I was a 6th grader. So it was helpful to walk in the shoes of a 6th grader, but that was the lens that I wanted to experience. I had 3 amazing students and it was funny because I started walking ahead of them and they're like, wait, we're leading the tour. And I said, sorry, I'm just really excited to, walk into the building and to pepper you with questions, which I did summarily after that. And, but they also stuck to their points. They even made sure to tell me about the bathroom protocols during transition times and during class time. But I'll share a couple highlights with the group, which is they are really proud of their school and they were really proud to be part of this touring team. And in particular, said it was an opportunity for them to get some leadership skills and to bond and get some team bonding with each other, which I think is something people are really craving, especially after the past few years. I asked them what they wanted to be when they were older. And of course, there was a range of options, but some sample professions were police officers, interior designers, engineers. I asked them about how they like their desks to be arranged. And they said, I like rows because sometimes I like to work individually. And then another person said, well, I really like groups because I want to interact with other people. That person was highly social. And then the third student said, I like it. It's a mix because sometimes I want to be working independently, but sometimes I want to be working with others. So again, the range. And they had some advice about what to order for lunch. Nachos, grilled cheese and tomato soup. So those are some highlights. So I now have sort of my top list for when I go there and grab my next lunch when school starts. And they appreciated their teachers. They walked around and they talked about their appreciation for the various teachers that a 6th grader would be meeting and learning from. So all in all, it was a pretty awesome tour. And I want to thank the team over there and Principal McGowan for his leadership in that school's efforts to welcome 6th graders, which is a key transition point. Some other big activities that have been happening, and I'll start with this. Actually, this is important, which is staffing. So you met our slew of administrators, which is incredible. We are in a really strong position. Again, I know I said this last meeting, a huge shout out to the entire HR team and to all the teams that are actually leading their, committee and work in the actual interview process. We have just a very few high needs areas still to be hired for, and only at a handful of schools. So that's incredible. We do have 26 schools in Echo Glen. And then, bottom line really is that all students will be greeted by a teacher assigned to their class when they come to school next week. So that's the bottom line, that one. In terms of our, building preparations and work there, a huge appreciation to our grounds crews, custodians, maintenance team members. Painting has been updated in many buildings. We have food service orders coming in. The kitchens are stocked. It's important to know that people, back to my comment around nachos and grilled cheese and tomato soup, we need to feed people. And, working around the clock to get the grounds up and running. During the summer, I know that we don't schedule that as regularly because we're, off and it's time to gear up, but this is high season and they've been working pretty hard. I did get to visit the May Valley Service Center and meet with Julius Carter and several team members that were coming through at the end of the day. And I saw, much of the food stock and knew that we were anticipating more orders coming in this week. So that was pretty incredible. As you heard from the new administrators, this has been a week of professional learning. And so building leaders have been leading their teams through instructional leadership focused training, which is a very big welcome, I think, return to that effort and attention to making sure that we are able to have equitable outcomes for all students. There is a specific focus on our multi-tiered systems of support that bring together both the academic side of the work as well as the social, emotional, and well-being side, and focusing what are the high leverage practices that really accelerate learning for all in a universal manner, that then allow us to, be better targeted with our interventions and supports on a one-to-one basis. So that's been exciting, and you heard a lot about that from our administrators. We also had a special services kickoff with an incredibly powerful keynote speaker who spoke a lot about how disability rights is civil rights and is a core part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was very powerful to have a national speaker and advocate be able to be in our space and to address that inclusion aspect of access for all students. And I welcomed over 100 new hires in different spaces. I got to speak at the Issaquah Schools Foundation Board meeting, which kicked off. Actually, the last public comment speaker on Zoom was just welcome to that group. And I also got to welcome our bus drivers, mechanics, custodial maintenance facilities team members. And I got to also go through my own compliance training, which happens every year for everyone. That happened today, which was very well done by Chris Burton. So I will say it was a very well done compliance training, which is nice because sometimes that can be a little dry. And our cabinet team trained ourselves. Well, we didn't train ourselves, but we participated in a training designed by Dave Montalvo and facilitated by Executive Director of Operations, Jason Morse, on our executive emergency response roles and responsibilities and how we set up for various scenarios. That information is obviously very confidential because we don't want to let people know what all of our plans are and how we respond to crises. But we went through a couple scenarios, and as we start off the school year, that is very important to refresh ourselves with overall. And as you heard me talk about safety and security as a primary focus as we were starting the school year. So that was incredibly powerful. Finally, we'll sure I've gotten to visit Echo Glen, and I had a wonderful meeting with the co-presidents of the newly formed Issaquah Special Education PTSA, and also had a meeting with the other regional superintendents in Puget Sound. So really making headway on my 100 days plan and getting to know a lot of the context and people who are leading in our ecosystem and our surroundings. So that's it for me.
Well, you've certainly been busy. You've hit the ground running. I know, to manage to get through all of those. So great. Yeah, you really had up, being able to touch all parts of the district. And I know this is the time of year where everybody gets into overdrive to get it ready for the school to start and get everybody on track. So great. Anybody have any questions for her? All right. Oh, do you have something, or Director Gallagher? I'm going to go with that.
Do you have any enrollment update for us?
We do, and I think that'll be part of an update coming up from Martin Turney
With budget.
with budget.
Going to talk about it there.
I can preview that we have, for EVP, we have had over 98% or about 98% contacted and responded. But Martin Turney will have more information and we can fold that in. That's helpful.
Why don't we go ahead and just, if he's going to talk about that during the budget, let's just go into that. Is that okay? All right, then we'll wrap this item up and go into budget adoption of resolution 1189. And so we'll start with a motion.
I move the board adopt resolution number 1189, which establishes appropriations for the 2022-2023 budget.
I second.
All right, so we have a motion on the table for adoption of our budget. We went through a public hearing at our last board meeting, which gave people an opportunity to chime in. So we'll go ahead and take your presentation, and I will ask if there's anybody that wants public input before we'll take a final vote. You mean like on the? Yeah, and I wasn't really enforcing that entirely on this one since it was a new one and we don't have the language on which. Oh, I didn't realize. I didn't see anybody that had their hand up. Oh, you mean on the on our board retreat and or on our works in progress? Ah, I see. I can't. I see. Yeah. So going forward on items that have no action to be taken or no ultimate action to be taken, we're just going to ask for public input to be taken at the very beginning. But since we didn't have that articulated inside of our agenda for this meeting, I was going to go ahead and stick with what we have. We've still never traditionally just asked it every single item to ask for public input. So you have something you would like to give input on related to our retreat or our the works in progress? Yes, I'm going to take it for today, but we're not going to do this afterwards because we're going to have it very specific on which items. And then you would have just given this input at the very beginning. Okay. At the very beginning. Yeah, where all those folks went up and spoke. Oh, I see. You mean the. Well, we're not going to answer questions. So this is not a question and answer opportunity. It's just input. So if you ask us a question, we'll just nod and say thank you for your input. If you really want an answer, you might have you take a look at the board or at the district website. There's a whole list of the people that you contact when you want answers to your questions, because we're not going to be able to answer your question. Well, again, if you would like to give comment, because we have traditionally before through this meeting, I will take it. It's comment. There's no answers to the question. So it's 2 minutes, state your name and attendance area, and we will reference this back to the retreat. Okay.
Hi, my name is Amy Dunn. I am the co-president of the new Issaquah Special Education PTSA. And I just wanted to say that I'm really happy about the 8 or did you say 10? I think you said 8 students that are going to be working with the board. And I hope that some of them are receiving special education services and or are aware of special education and have that focus in their school. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now that we finished that one, let's go back to our motion that is on the table related to the budget. And we'll turn it over to Martin. So like I was saying was that we've already had a public hearing at our last board meeting where we had an opportunity for people to comment on the budget. I don't know if you've received any other input since then, and then we'll again ask for input on this agenda item in case anybody has any input on the budget before we take a vote.
No, Martin Turney, again, Chief Financial Officer. We have not received anything in my office related to this topic. Would you like me to go through maybe hit enrollment,
Yeah.
topics?
Yeah,
Okay.
great. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, this is the culmination of a long process. We did have some conversation in the spring around reductions. We also had the previous board meeting presentation where we went through some slides and provided the guide and the F-195 document that is the full budget document. I want to thank Mariah Banasek for her work on this. She was very big help in our office getting this done. To touch on enrollment, I can give you as of today, as mentioned, we go through an enrollment verification process, and at this point we have 98.35% respondents or people we've connected with. So there are some that we are unable to connect with, and that typically happens. So some will find out whether they're coming or they won't show based on that, but that's a pretty good turnout. Our numbers at this point are showing that we are up from projection. So we projected down by about 300. We are up from, what's that? Okay, yeah, we're up from projection for about 176. So we are still down from the previous year. And most of what we're picking up is in K3. So most of that 176 is in those lower grades. So over the 3-year period, we're still down to about 1,800 students. Yes. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Our projection was 18,991. We're currently at 19,168. I apologize.
We're not as down as we thought we might be.
Correct.
Yes, and one way to say it. Okay, good.
Now, sometimes those fluctuate.
Right.
It can change between now and our first counts or the October count, and it can also fluctuate during the year. But that's where we sit right now, and I think that's a pretty positive place to be considering our projections.
Okay, and most of that return was in the K3.
Correct.
Okay, well, that's good. Good. All right,
So I don't know if there are any questions.
Director Gallagher.
Yep.
So I have enrollment questions, but this is really the budget.
Yeah.
So would you prefer me to ask it somewhere else?
Nope, go ahead and unless you all had any other part of a formal presentation related to the budget, because we did that at the last one. So if you didn't have anything, then let's open it up to budget questions.
So the 176 students, is that kind of just evenly distributed across our district, or was it focused in certain areas such that you needed to hire new teachers at the last minute?
Yes, so we did have some where we needed to divvy out some FTE. I can say right now, some of the schools that we saw some increase as of right now are Apollo, some Cascade Ridge, Creekside, Issaquah Valley, and Maple Hills. And again, those are based on projection. So those are from the previous projection. So what we did was we had a collaborative meeting with our elementary folks and our HR folks, and we talked through what it looked like coming in and whether we needed to redistribute FTE and divvy out to certain schools based on anticipated class size with that new enrollment.
And when was that done? Meaning, like, how recent was that? And that all of those 5 extra classes, for example, have teachers hired for them?
Yeah, so we did that about a week or so ago. Yep, and you're giving me the thumbs up on hired. Okay.
Oh, that's good. All right. Other questions on the budget? We've already gone through. The last time we had, just for reference for people, we had a presentation related to the budget. We had the guide to understanding the budget, and we have the full F-195, which is our budget document. So this has all been reviewed by the board in preparation for the last meeting. This one is our official action to approve the budget. I'll go back to anything else. No, looks like everybody's good on it. Do you have any comments or anything you want to add before?
I want to thank the team, especially on the hustle to consider how we would, approach the increase of enrollment. A great partnership between human resources and finance team members. So thank you.
Great. So now before we take a vote, we have a question?
Well, it's not so much a question, partly is because I wasn't here last week or last 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that this will be a good as we build up our legislative discussion. So I appreciate these numbers and specifically drive home the $12 million being funded. It's nearly $8,000 per special ed student being funded out of local dollars. To me, special education is basic education, and the state should be picking up the whole dime.
And along similar lines, the lack of funding in transportation too, right? Which really should be a state funded piece across the board. All right, I'm going to see if there's anyone that wants to make public comment before the board takes a vote on this particular item. And if there is, they could step up to the microphone. All right, with seeing no public comment. And Stephen, if there is anybody, you just shouted out to me from the Zoom. All right, then all of those in favor of the budget adoption resolution 1189, say aye. Aye. And anybody opposed, abstain. And I heard 5 ayes, so it passes. So we have a budget, and thank you very much for all your work. I know the budget is a lot of work, and before too long, you'll be starting your next, the next one, right? It's a never ending cycle, but
Thank you very much.
thank you. Yeah, I know it's hard because they always turn around and say, oh, you worked the audit for the prior one and now you're in this one and you got to start planning the next one. So, all right, we are now on to the monitoring report for EL2. So we'll start with we'll start with a motion.
I move the board accept the monitoring report EL2 treatment of people as presented.
Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. This item was left over from the 2021-2022 school year monitoring calendar. This report monitoring really should have occurred in May. And at the time, our then superintendent asked for an extension because staff had their hands full keeping school going and staffed. And, people from admin were working in many of the buildings trying to keep school going. So we decided to push it out to August, and which makes it difficult because, to be super clear, during the 2021 school year and our monitoring, we are covering the 2020-2021 school year, which was deeply impacted by COVID. I'm reading this and going, oh, no, that didn't happen. Oh, right. This report is about the 2020-2021 school year. And so we all have to keep that in mind. It is very old, and I recognize that, and we have to realize it. I also realize it's somewhat unfair to ask our new superintendent to present a report on a school year of which she wasn't even anywhere near us, let alone the ones that we're doing now that you're reporting on what happened last year. And again, you weren't there. So having all of that put together, let's go ahead because we really would like to kind of close up our 21-22 monitoring and take a look at this report. And then, of course, it will come back to us later in the year for the 21-22 school year monitoring. So if that wasn't confusing enough, we'll start. If you have anything you would like to share as we take a look at this, and then we'll open it up to any questions or comments from the board.
I do want to thank you, President Moore, for talking about the context of the year of 20 to 21. I had to remind myself what calendar and school year we were in, given the past 3 years. So yes, this is the year that the primary focus was on learning as an entire community how to navigate what public education was during a pandemic, and starting the school year for a majority of our students in a remote model, then with a flip in the spring to have all students back in person. So just echoing appreciation for you noting that, and also just echoing that context from my point of view, because I did experience that not here in Issaquah, but in another district. And so I have that memory very much deep in my mind and in my heart. So I do have a couple of highlights that I want to sort of bring forward, because I do want to say that I this is my interpretation as it currently stands based on what I know and what I have learned and what I have gleaned from an incredible team of people who have compiled and contributed to this monitoring report. So I have been immersed in it and internalized it, and I'll share a couple of highlights from my point of view. So the first thing I'll talk about is really and I'll if it's helpful, I'll just focus on a couple of page numbers. But page 2 and page 3, as it relates to making sure that there is a climate characterized by support and encouragement, the climate change, right? So not only were we, through our normal course of work, in charge of meeting a range of student needs and learning styles, but we then had to learn how to do that across multiple modalities. So a lot of our focus was on investing in training and support and learning very quickly so that we could turnkey that learning around about how to teach remotely. A notable aspect of that training, which is something that I also leverage and utilize in my own training where I was working at the time, was the Distance Learning Playbook by Douglas Fisher, Nancy Frey, and John Hattie. So I just want to note that that was really a big thing. I mean, we are on a pathway to continuing to hone our work with multi-tiered systems of support. So again, we were not only figuring out how to continue to serve a range of learners, but also through a range of modalities and some combination of those as well. Another component of this report and monitoring report that I want to highlight is the expansion of our platform on a learning management system for learning referenced on page 5 of the report. And in particular, again, we had to quickly get up and running with both technological skills, but also people utilization skills in that regard. And that not only happened for our staff, but it happened, and in this section, pertinent to families. How do families support their children in accessing information in a learning management system? Our youngest learners haven't used computers before. They had to figure out logins. They had to figure out troubleshooting and across different also types of devices as well. And so I just want to note that that highlight in my mind around how we actually had to think differently about parent engagement, as well as think differently about parent engagement in a remote setting as well, while we continue to pursue similar and the same activities as we had done in the past, but through a remote setting. The other aspect of this report that's important for me is section 3. I'm just referring to my cross-referencing here, and thinking about the importance of how we would look at and determine whether or not our adults were really fostering the right kind of mindsets, behaviors, and accountability to support student performance and well-being. And to me, that's not just around accountability, although that's an important component. It was also just around making sure that we were in conversation and feedback, and making sure everyone had the right access to the right things they needed to be doing, especially because we were in a remote setting for a large part of the year. And that was training, that extended to both staff and volunteers, and was threaded throughout the different evaluation systems. And of course, we had areas where we were able to address any areas where there were issues that did come up. In section, let's see, on communication overall, I just want to note that, on page 7 and going through onto page 8 and a bit onto page 9, we really did have to, that was the year of over surveying. So I will just say this out loud. So when people ask, how did you communicate with families? Well, we did a lot of surveys because we had to get input. We had to figure out what people needed, and also at various points in the year, determine what is your preference, because that did change. And we couldn't assume that what a parent might have responded in October for their preference for their child's learning modality was the same again in March. So it was the year of surveys. So I'll just say that was quite an effort from a communications and technology lens. And the team did a nice job with that. And I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory. I'll just note that for section 7, we did have to also, which is referenced on page 12 in particular. Again, the highlight here is we had to execute on getting out laptops and hotspots, in particular to make sure we could support the remote learning environment and that kids had access to what they needed to be able to access the learning. So with that, submit this report with my interpretation on behalf of myself, but the system. Appreciate the team's efforts in compiling and reflecting back a year and a half during a very challenging year, and really wanting to note to you and to the public where there were some specific changes or differences this year given COVID and the way the modalities switched throughout the year for learning in person to remote. For learning from remote to in person, and some hybrid as well. So that's it.
That was the year of all modes of education.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm glad that the next year, was definitely back into the buildings. And now this year is going to be an even better return to school. So, all right, I'm going to open it up to any questions or comments. Director Mullings?
My first is purely a comment, I guess, to tie back to part of the earlier conversation on the retreat. And you mentioned in your beginning, Superintendent, which is one of the things as part of this transition we'll look at is these interpretations.
Yes.
And so when we say interpretations, I don't know if people know what that means. And so it's literally the section at the top of these documents that say, we have the policy, but then how do you believe you carry that out? And so just a common language. I just think it's important to call that out, that part of the top that says, how do you, superintendent, believe the district, the organization meets that policy? And so that's the top part of this document. And that won't be a small amount of work.
It won't
to
be.
go through and look at these policies and refresh with your lens of what's happening. So that's my first comment. The second one is, yes, it's very hard to figure out what year this is. I literally had to draw on my piece of paper which school year was the start of COVID, the next school year where we started remote and ended. So it's a little mind numbing at the moment. I think for me, what's most important is just to acknowledge about this time period that while it was maybe still chaotic for us, it was sure a lot better than the end of the year before. And so I think, I just want to acknowledge that out loud, that end of the 2019, 2020 and the start of COVID was incredibly chaotic and didn't have even these components we're calling out here about what was the LMS, the consistent parent engagement, how families could help support their students during the process. And so it seems a bit rudimentary as you look back on it, but for me, it's just of note to say that was a big deal to allow our students to engage in a way that was much better than the end of the year before and to allow their families to support them while we were still remote. So it just seems, it doesn't capture that piece of it of how these items were truly heroic in order to put in place for the beginning of that year.
That is true. It was quite a shock to go back and remember exactly what this year was across the board. Any others? Director Gallinger.
So I'll just start from the bottom. So on 13, where it says permit the superintendent may not permit the administration of corporal punishment, I accept the evidence as saying that there have been 0 reported cases. And I think that one makes sense. I think that this is probably one of the more important ELs, not that there's any less ones that we do, but that just at times feels like it just doesn't scratch the itch that a lot of us have. So 12, for example, so this is where I know you're going to have to get support to answer these questions. So get ready. When it says the superintendent may not fail to protect students who have voiced grievances from retaliation within the school environment, and then the evidence is all claims of retaliation are investigated and appropriate action taken. And that's nice language, but I actually really want to know, like, were there 0 in this reporting year? Or were there 2? Or were there 25? So I need to know numbers on when it says all. So having the quantitative part is going to be really helpful for me. So that's something that we could get answered if I can't answer tonight, but to know sort of, and there are multiple instances about that I'm really curious on to really make sure that we know. And when it's, was there student appeals? And the biggest one for me is still 4220, because I think that's the most complicated one that we have. That's the kind of the catch-all. If a community member has a concern, especially now that it's like 18 plus months ago, like how many 4220 complaints came in that year and what was the disposition of them? And I know we've had this conversation before, so this isn't a new request or conversation, but just having the subjective, like these are the guardrails in place, 4220, this is how you do it. That gets at the what, but not at the sort of truly for me, the evidence on like, oh yeah, we heard this many complaints and this is again, the disposition of them. So, and like I said, I know we've asked this stuff before. So that was really number 10, which is, I think is the big one that really, we just generally as a board have been challenged with, because that is that connection to the community where I think it at best is probably equally dissatisfying for all of us involved. But in particular, we would just kind of love to know that and trend it, because especially if we're seeing an increase that in 2015, we had 10 of these community complaints. And by 2020, we're down to 2. That's very different versus if it's reverse. That's why it's helpful. And so not having that trend line is really hard to know, like, are we really like meeting the needs? And then my specific question on something, this is for HR, is page 6, I think it is. It lists beautifully all the different trainings that happen and that are required. My question is, in the bullet that says staff trainings that specifically address behaviors, et cetera, which is also similar to the list in EL 6, is do we have training on what it means to be a mandatory reporter? Because I presume that we do, but I think that that would be an important thing to include in both this one and in EL 6, because it's a really important thing that school systems do to keep kids safe. And we in the healthcare community, we saw a major dip during COVID of abuse cases being reported. And we don't believe it's because all of a sudden with COVID, the abuse stopped, especially when we know that the alcohol rate did this. So I think that's an important piece of evidence to include.
Could you go up to the microphone just so you can answer that on the record? And then that can be something, because I heard you nodding your head to
Yes.
answer.
Assistant Superintendent Donna Hood, Human Resources. Yes, that is a required annual training, and we do make sure that our staff get that training. It depends on the year, how the mode that we might do it in. Sometimes we'll do it in safe schools. Sometimes we'll do it in staff training in the buildings. But yes, it is completed, and I will happily add it to the list.
Can I piggyback a little bit on what Director Gallinger said about number 10? Because we've spun our wheels around on this one for a while, and I don't think it's not just that we're not getting what we want. I'm not sure what we want exists, but to give the extreme example, let's say you have a classroom where the teacher is so horrible that every single family in that classroom is upset. So what's going to happen? Some of them, a few of them just aren't going to say anything at all because they don't. Some of them will complain to the teacher and their issue may or may not get resolved. A few of them will go as far as complaining to the principal, who may or may not deal with the teacher. And I would guess out of a classroom of 30, 25 kids, I'd be surprised if even one actually filed a 4220. And, you know, parents hear all this stuff through the grapevine. Oh, make sure your kid doesn't get this teacher or this class because there's a problem here, a problem there. And this is, let me preface this, this is not like a widespread issue. I'm not saying we have a lot of horrible teachers, but I'm saying when there is an issue, parents are going to deal with it in a lot of different ways, very few of which are going to be visible to us at this level. And so, as he said, there's an itch that isn't being scratched. And I don't know how you scratch it. You know, Ron's comment was, well, if the principal is dealing with the issue and it's being resolved, then it's not a problem. And that would be true. But again, because families deal with things in so many different ways, and even though we say, yes, of course, you have the option of filing a 4220, that feels really formal and really scary. And I mean, even with the amount of knowledge that I have about the system, I would be sort of loath to do that unless there was something really, really egregious. So I don't know how the board kind of gets its brain around, do we have a lot of complaints? Don't we have a lot of complaints? If we're only going by 4220s, I feel like we're missing a big chunk. But I don't have any really brilliant ideas of how we get there. But I wanted to say that because we've talked about this, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years and never really gotten anywhere.
Yeah. So never really found something that kind of answered that. Director Gallinger?
I agree. And that's why I think, I mean, if we had some sort of like complaint inbox or some way to filter or find or discover, that was my actually intent of the email that I sent out about technology, that I feel that the administration responded back to me of, oh, well, they'll just tell their teacher. Well, that actually doesn't actually get us to the answer that I'm looking for, because of what Director Weaver just so beautifully laid out, that the various different options that people have to get feedback, very few of them actually get to the people who make the decisions, which is us. And so my concern when we're going to make this massive investment on one-on-one technology, and to not have a district-wide, hey, here's this email you send to if you have an issue or concern. That to me sends a message of we're not being transparent. We don't really want to hear from you. And that's why, so that would be a great example for us to try and trial this to see like, how do we actually capture and build in a informal feedback loop that isn't to the level of 4220, but that starts that process of really truly soliciting, saying, hey, parents are partners, our secondary students are partners, frankly, in technology and could do way more than I can easily have two computers. Let's try and get the meeting to work. And so that was the intent. So just to be clear of what I was asking for. And another example where just the itch wasn't being scratched as far as it's not really the way that our parents engage. And we have to build a system and process that parents in our community engage with. And so saying, oh, just go talk to your teacher or principal. So few people will do that, that we, again, nothing will filter up to us to hear, is one-on-one really working? Is that just yet one example of this?
I see Director Mullings.
Yes, and I try normally not to add on, but I feel compelled to in this case, right? Because I think ultimately, at least from my perspective, the goal is not just can we identify how much it's happening, but can we be assured that there's a systemic improvement? So if a situation is identified in one place, can we, know what it is, know that it's been looked to local building, but also know that there's a way that improvement, for lack of a better word, becomes systemic across schools. And that's certainly been my part of wanting to get to not just the identification, which could be more clear based on what's been said, but also, and how do we know if something's gotten better or we've proactively avoided it happening in another place?
Director Moraldo.
And I think this has been something we've discussed about more than just the past couple of years. This has been really ongoing for me in 13 years that I've been here. And I think especially is there an informal way that somebody can say something, or, to me, it's much to the work that our elementary teachers have to do where, okay, I did this one thing with the student, so I'm going to make sure I'm tracking it in the Swiss information. Do we have something similar? Like, okay, I've heard from this and this and this about whatever's happening, treatment of that's engaged. So that even if it's an informal, where are we tracking it? Because what really happens in a lot of cases is much to Director Weaver's standpoint is, out of the maybe 7 or 10 people that might be discontent about a certain situation, only one might rise to bring it up to an informal conversation. And then you get, much like we saw earlier today, the onslaught of change in administration, and you basically hit a reset button because nobody knows beforehand that this has been an ongoing problem and it's not getting any better. And so how do we do that tracking? And it has been really frustrating to know that I hear things, people call me, I see somebody in a grocery store, we see somebody at a PTA, and then they just go off because they've been frustrated. Nobody's listening. And I have no way of managing that as a board director, except for through this EL, which by the time it comes around, I may have forgotten, I had this conversation. How does it ever show up? I can talk about things that have happened to my own kids. When does it ever get to show up?
And these things are super active in the parent grapevine.
Mhm.
If you're a parent, you absolutely know these things. And yet I would venture to say that a whole lot of that is totally unknown to administration because it just operates in that grapevine level. And I don't, and I'm not putting the onus of that on the administration entirely, right? If parents are going to talk to each other and not talk to the teacher or the principal, well, then yeah, we're not going to have changes. But a lot of parents just aren't comfortable doing it.
Well, I think we also have to look at, we have a different generation of parents, generationally, how they're communicated with, that we are not necessarily changing our system. It hasn't changed since when my kids were in elementary school. And so how do we really interact with a new generation of parents that are out there? So I do think that there's some ways for us to be able to say, figuring that out. I think it's a nut to crack. Like, where do we?
It's been a nut to crack for a while.
Yeah.
This gives us new opportunities to think about how you might be able to take a stab at it.
I appreciate the discussion. And I did know there's discussion about this over the years, but it's helpful to be in the discussion in the moment. So thank you. I'm kind of taking away two things. One is a bit around what is it that we're trying to really know? And I hear an element of responsiveness. Like, how do we, complaints will happen, and or queries or situations will come up that sometimes we cannot avoid and we don't know about all the time. But that being said, it's also about what is the response and what is the learning from that, and how does that get shared in a way systemically that does, right, ward off any future repeat of mistakes. But also, to me, that's important because it's part of responding. And I'm not going to know all the details of how a principal has responded immediately to a community member or parent who's brought a, an issue forward in the moment, at dismissal, at arrival, that kind of thing. So I'm mulling on this and appreciate that. But I'm really hearing a lot about the system learning, about also what's our responsiveness, in addition to the nature of what is happening and how do we know, not just looking backwards in a year in a report as well. So thank you.
Right. And as we go through and reevaluate the interpretation, that might give us an opportunity to chat too about how could we do this? What is either out there or could be created as a process or a system that would help us pull in this information. So we can kind of weave that into it if we're going to go back through and take a look at the interpretation, because that it ultimately will then need evidence for it.
I think this was much deeper than that, because I think Issaquah School District does a lot of great things, and it is a lot of great things. But one of the things that we're not great culturally is feedback. And there is a cultural pervasive fear in our community that if we provide feedback, there's going to be retaliation. And so it even goes from our classrooms to our students, to parents, to say, do not share anything because I'm worried about what's going to happen to me. And so part of it is we have to, as leaders of this district, change that culture. And I think the first part is access. And right now, one thing we'll hear consistently and do hear consistently through our community is whenever we talk with them is there's not a feedback loop. Like, there just isn't an effective feedback loop. And we don't even have any access points for how do they give feedback. Not every parent wants to like complain and say, you need to go do this. Like, it's not that kind of feedback. Most of our parents, by and large, like probably 95% of it would be actually really helpful information. But we literally have no place for that to go beyond our rote answers as a district is go to your classroom teacher. And it's not trying to supplant that route. Absolutely go to your classroom teacher. But we're missing out on the opportunity to really deeply hear, deeply listen, and deeply learn from and change as a system.
Just to be clear, we will take public comment after the board has a discussion, and I will ask for it. So I will let you know when that time has come. Director Moraldo.
I wanted to speak a little bit to number one. Again, going back to, I'm looking forward to interpretations because I'm not satisfied with the one that's currently there. And I believe a lot of the data that comes, it's one of those things where, again, this is about several years ago, but I think the data that's there doesn't necessarily go to evidence. I don't know how it ties back to the evidence about failure to assure a climate that is characterized by support and encouragement. I understand our teachers go through a whole lot of training, but how does that training get back to ultimately their treatment of students and the encouragement and support of students? And in fact, this doesn't even say to students. And that's what's interesting about this, is that it's a treatment of all people in the system. So I'm more interested in how do we assure a climate that is characterized by support and encouragement for our teachers of color or our staff members of color. So for me, I think there's so much more that can go into what this is, thinking holistically about all the people that we engage with, on a daily basis within the system? And how are we building a climate that we will be kind, welcoming, supportive, and encouraging of people in their roles, whether it's a student, whether it's a staff, whether it's an administrator, whether it's a parent or an external community member? How do we ensure that? So I think it's going to be a deeper interpretation of that. It's a few words that mean a whole lot.
You know, this may be board work in that, didn't we merge treatment of people and treatment of students into one?
Yes.
And then we changed the learning environment one to be about
We
grading.
did.
And I think maybe we don't have enough specificity in our language. Now, that could be solved by the superintendent's reinterpretation, or we could be explicit.
Right. And because we had the one, what was it? EL where we reviewed the interpretation, but we didn't monitor. it.
EL,
Was it
EL 12, and
12?
we haven't even
Yeah.
approved the interpretation. Well,
Yeah.
No,
we don't approve them, but
Yeah,
we haven't,
right.
hasn't been, final interpretation hasn't been given to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and all of this, as far as going back through all these interpretations, will be a lot of work. And it's possible that, again, as always, we look at the EL and realize it doesn't say what we really, really want. And therefore, we have to change the EL itself, possibly to get what we want out of it. So that's just a process we'll have to go through as we relook at the interpretations. Do we find any of those? And then we work through that process. So. I just want to make sure, Director Moraldo, I see you're taking notes, and it would help to make sure you put down the answer that Donna mentioned as far as the data related to that.
I don't typically get that specific on these. I usually
You just give her a note, because then I just feel like we need to take more advantage of what we write on these.
Okay, so
And
what
making
would you like me to write?
The what did you call it? It mandatory reporting training. Just that kind of a note, because then that'll trigger it for the next time.
Then I'm going to need a bigger page.
Well, you don't need all of it. I just, since that was a very specific piece, that one would get picked up that way. All right, other things? Are we good for this for now? Dr. Mullins, do you have something?
I'm just joking. No.
Director. Did I say doctor?
I think that's why I laughed.
Hey, if I can give out degrees, go ahead and take it. Director.
I've been conveyed. No.
Mhm. All right. Anybody else? I will. I want to get your comments out first before we move to that. Okay. Do you have anything else you would like to add, Superintendent?
No, I appreciate this as we think about the interpretation moving forward, but also wrestling with the topics of how do we look at progress along the way versus in arrears.
Mhm. All right. So now, as we're drawing our discussion to a close, I will ask for public input either in the room or on Zoom. And if you're in the room, you can come up to the microphone. It still state your name and your attendance area, and we have our 2-minute timer.
Thank you. Michelle Whitehead again, Grand Ridge Elementary. Thank you, board members, for those comments on that. I don't know, I don't have the PDF in front of me, so I don't know what number it was. I think it was number 10. I do want to assure you that parents do know how to make complaints. We have gone directly to teachers. When we don't get a response from the teacher, we go directly to the principal. We don't get a response from the principal, we go directly to the executive members of our district staff. That being said, I want to also mention other forms of complaints that parents have had to go to. We've had to go to the Office of Superintendent. We've had to go to the Ombudsman. We've had to go to Disability Rights of Washington. We've had to go to lawyers. We have had to write our district school board members. We have had to join groups. I personally have joined 114 Facebook groups. It is in the pipeline, and it's not something that we're ashamed of. We're not in fear of retaliation. We want to be heard. And I do think it should be public knowledge, the amount of complaints that this district gets. The only way that parents can access these complaints is by public records request, either directly locally through the district or through the Office of Superintendent. My last phone call to the OSPE was a private conversation. The person never got back to me. They called this district and spoke to you directly. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Is there anyone else in the room or on Zoom? Nobody on Zoom? All right, in the room?
Yeah, hey, I'm Doug Crandall. And I have a good friend named Shawnee Dow who started a company called Possum. And it's Harlan, it's exactly what you're talking about. So I would just recommend you look into it. She's out of Nashville. It's a startup. It interprets feedback in multiple different languages. It reaches this generation. I was just texting Shawnee and she said she might have talked to you about it before. So I think it would be exactly what you're looking for. And I just told her your discussion right now, which was really good, as an advertisement for what they're doing. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you for your input. All right, I don't see anyone else. So all those in favor of approval of the monitoring report EL2 treatment of people, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained. All right, sound like everybody voted yes. And so that one's passed and we'll have some work to do going forward. All right. We are now on to monitoring report EL5 actual financial condition and activities, and we'll start with a motion.
I move the board accept the annual monitoring report for EL5, actual financial condition and activities, internal annual audit report as presented.
Second.
All right, we'll take a presentation of information. The board will have discussion, and this will again be one of those where I will, since the board will take action, I'll ask for input.
Okay, Martin Turney, Chief Financial Officer. This has to do with actual financial condition and activities. So I believe in the past we've kind of hit some highlights and then taken whatever questions you have specific to the document. We start off the very beginning here by typically calling out the audits, and we have had our 20th clean audit recently. So again, a time to thank Mariah Panaxic, everyone in the business office, everyone out at the building who does that good work to keep us in line with the audit. So that's something we always like to call out first and foremost. I'll just skip ahead. There's a bit of information on fund balance, and we've touched on some of that during the recent budget conversation. This lays it out slightly different for the EL. Page 5, maintaining the unrestricted reserve fund within the 3 to 7% gives some evidence that is more of a point in time versus our budget. So it's slightly different than the budget information we laid out recently. So it's just a different look at it, but also to provide evidence of maintaining that 3 to 7%. Under additional information, it lays out actually what we just spoke about recently at the budget. So that's a repeat. Turning to the next page, page 6, I'd like to call out and remind that we maintain your $1 million board reserve. We continue to make sure that that's part of the fund balance reserve. Page 7, additional information. This is more of a snapshot of the fund balance. So it kind of goes along with, again, proving that we're maintaining that 3 to 7%. And the snapshot gives us a look at what we anticipate the ending fund balance will be for this year based on a budget status report. So again, a different look, but it is meant to give you that snapshot and look forward to the end of the year, saying that we anticipate that we will be within that range. So those are the few things I wanted to highlight, and then take any questions you had about this information.
All right, I'm opening it up for questions, comments, as everybody looks at it. Director Gallinger.
Martin, can you tell us when, so it's section 4, right before number 5, it says the major areas generating accounts receivable issues are school age care and building rentals. Is there another part in here that you talk about like what those numbers are? I see the total number above as far as like what you had to write off.
Right.
But
So
I know that this last year has been still in recovery. And then I know next year what we're forecasting for school age care to be as revenue generation is going to be different. So I know this is looking at the year we just had.
Correct.
But it would be great again if we could see the trend line for, and it would have to include a pre-COVID number about what that is. Does that make sense? So if like school age care was generating $2 million and the uncollected funding for that was 20,000, and then last year it was $1 million and the collection was still 20,000. Like, so if we could actually have numbers and trends, that's actually much more helpful for us, because otherwise I don't know how to interpret the 0.747% in context. So it's like when you give the answer of like, well, we're 176 students difference. I'm like, difference from what? So I think that would be just helpful for us to see and to know. That's how we can track and trend the recovery from COVID, because we know one of the biggest things that impacted our budget was we went from something that normally contributed to our budget to was a drag on our budget. And so as we look like so closely at our budget by the springtime, that's how we can look and see like, okay, is before and after school care still a drag on our budget? Because that then needs to bring up a conversation on, is this really a district program that we can continue to afford if we're losing money on it? And so I don't have any way to see that what was the last year that we lost money on it, such that was this last current year that we're reviewing actually a year that we broke even. So we're kind of missing that really important piece to know. Does that make sense?
Right, because we're back on our normal monitoring. So to be clear,
Correct.
this is this year's monitoring, which is looking at last school year. So we are now in the 22-23 school year, and this is monitoring 21-22. Okay. And I had a similar question when I was talking about the budget in one of my conversations with you about, is the school age care getting back to at minimum revenue neutral, right? Because it can't be something that becomes a drag on our budget, because our core mission is to provide our official pre-K, K through 12th grade and our special programs. And so this does become very important. And you bring up, there are multiple parts to it. It's both, how much revenue is coming in and the trend for that in relation to what its expenses are, and how much is uncollectible and what impact that has on the overall financials of the program. And some of this goes to, so this would apply to specifically the school age care. I don't think the building rentals has as big of an issue with that.
So what I'm taking from this, what I have here is we typically give you 1 year and a one data point. Having a trend for this section would be helpful because it provides that context that you're looking for. And then I'm also hearing perhaps there's some things we can do during the budget presentation as it relates to school age care that can help us with the revenue and expenditure differences.
Yes, right. So this report doesn't actually give us the number, right? It only gives us the percent of uncollected that was written off. We don't actually know what the number was. But I won't need it. For me, the springtime conversation will be, so in this current year, as best as of April, are we broke even? Are we above or are we below? That's the question I will want to know the answer to when it comes time to budget conversation next spring.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And just while you're preparing for that, I do have a tangential question on that. Is what is school age care now? So we also, it stopped being middle school during COVID when we shrunk. And so it is interesting. I mean, Carlin's questions are always interesting, but his question is even more interesting because we've expanded the number of sites now with a new elementary school. But we also didn't go back to, I don't know if we went back to middle school programming. So it is a very interesting year over year. And maybe it's more of a projection question for me is like, what do we expect that program to be doing? Because it's changed in shape as well. I don't mean to bird walk on school age care, but it is an interesting
It's a
point.
part of it.
Excuse me, Jason Morris, Executive Director of Operations. But in my job change, I continue to supervise the before and after school care program. Too many acronyms. So that goes by BASC or school age care, just so we know we're talking about the same thing. I did check today prior to this meeting, anticipating possibly a question. So the school age care program during the COVID pandemic, we were not allowed or able to continue the secondary, the 6 through 8, which we called Impact, which was our middle school clubs. We ended up focusing on the elementary, and we are hopefully planning on continuing to expand in a couple areas. Right now we're hoping to continue to grow the program and stabilize our budget. Should we be able to financially in the future, we'd like to try to bring back some middle school services and possibly expand our preschool services as well. Again, should the finances allow. Now, currently we are registering students quite actively right now. We are currently approximately 10% above our enrollment from a year ago. So we're right close to 1,500 students being served. So right now, our enrollment projection for our school age care is increasing. One of the limiting factors regarding expansion oftentimes is space, but more often than not in this climate has been availability of full-time employees to operate the program. That's been something we've been working with. We are continue to actively recruit. We continue to pull in additional employees, but that is kind of a quasi-limiting factor. But right now, as of this week, we're approximately 10% above where we were at last year, and we believe that we will be able to continue to grow that through the fall registration process.
Does that 0.47% include preschool, or is it truly only before and after school care?
The 10% that I'm speaking of right now is our before and after school care students.
Yeah, no, as a question for
Yeah, that was on the uncollectibles.
yeah. So
Yeah, on
does
the
that
0.47%.
because maybe what I really want to know is like, so what is the before after school care is one line, and then preschool, because our preschool programs have grown dramatically over the course of the past several years.
Mhm.
And that's the benefit of Holly Street, but we should probably actually see what is
Right.
the impact to our budget of our preschool programs. Because again, to the point that you guys have made is like, these are optional things that we're doing outside of our K-12 mission.
Right. And I think we see the detail when the uncollectibles come to us. Because at some point we have a resolution to write those off.
Correct.
So it'd be like collecting that information and looking at it over time. Mhm.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the numbers for preschool at our disposal right now. But
If you have another question, I'll move to number 9. So number 9, where it says that the interpretation and then the evidence, I think for me, it's missing something, because this should reflect what actually happened. And it makes it look like we're trying to hide something. And I don't believe that was the intent of this. But this is where I would want to see this added before we approve it, or after we put it. Like, if this is approved tonight, it's that important to me. But to say, like, in the 2021 school year, we did, like, this was what we projected, and this is what we actually did as far as when it says the superintendent shall not expend more funds than have been received in the fiscal year unless, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we used fund balance last year. We had lengthy discussions about using fund balance, but it's actually not reflected here. So it should say, and I know this would have to still be estimate because I know you're still closing the books on this school year actively, is like, we estimate that we used X amount of fund balance. And this is really important because this is the public document that says and matches, okay, so we had all this budgetary issues and this is what would then be reflected as saying that this is the financial hole that we're in, and this demonstrates that we actually decreased our fund balance. Because in that fact meeting, there was a question on, did we really even use our fund balance? To which you guys said, well, yes, and then we used it by this much. This is where it would be reflected. And it's not that by putting that piece of evidence in there, you're not in compliance, you're in compliance, because it says like the board clearly was aware and approved it, but it's missing. And I think that's a huge piece that's actually missing from here that I think belongs here. The second part of that question is, if you look at that list of numbers, they don't match the financial documents that we just approved. So I'm curious about how, like the reserve for future schools.
So this is a snapshot of the 21-22 current budget status and will differ from the budget document because it is a snapshot of.
But the budget document that lists when it specifically lists what last year's was, like that $9 million reserved for future schools is not $9 million in the last year's numbers. That's my question.
In the prior year's guide.
6.5.
Guide to understanding the budget.
Okay.
So those are just the two fixes that I would like to see.
And I think that one of the challenges with telling the story of that fund balance too is, for example, them receiving the $8 million, if I have this right, that they received from the state as part of the hold harmless, that they really expected in this year, but we got it last year. So it had less of a negative effect on the fund balance because they got that money last year. So it makes it a complicated story, right?
But we still decreased from 38 to 34.
We did. It's just a difference. And then you'd add that 8 onto it in a sense, because as far as how much we would have decreased if we hadn't to end that year compared to being in this year and receiving that money.
What's saying that, you could say like, so that we took approximately $4 million from the fund balance. Had we not received the state hold harmless, it would have been 12 million. Okay.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, that's where I'm going.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure I understood you.
Yes. Director Maldo.
Well, I think, and it goes a little bit into the interpretation, I think, doesn't really, and maybe it's somewhere in here that, we specify in the actual EL that these legal means of getting those additional revenues are fund balances, et cetera. So I think it would be really helpful. I'm glad that you said something because I was thinking the same thing, like, well, I mean, I know that money's not necessarily my biggest bailiwick that I understand, but I had that same feeling, like, I don't feel COVID in this report. And I didn't know how to express it. I think you did a better job of expressing it.
I'm going to speak to the uncollectible monies. Mariah Van Astic, Executive Director of Finance and Budget. So this year, I pulled up the details. So this year there was about $8,000, and we usually do that in December during the board meeting as a resolution. So last year was about $8,000. And then prior to COVID, it was about $18,000. And that 0.47% that you're talking about, that is the total invoiced revenue. So that's based on that. So that does fluctuate depending on how much revenue you have for the programs. So that increase, I think it was a little bit lower, the point, maybe 2 or 3. I would have to pull exact. So, and that's because you're just not receiving as much revenue. And so that's why it went up a little bit. So I hope that's helpful for that question.
Director Mullins.
My question is maybe more procedural in nature, and it's about as we get this number in the reserve gets thinner, I guess is what I'm wondering, which is the emergency board reserve technically, as I understand it, sits outside of that 3% that we're keeping as
Yes.
Correct.
as undesignated. And so is it basically procedurally the last line before that 3%? Or how do we think about its use in this equation?
Give me a
Are
little
you saying
more.
looking backwards or
Yeah.
looking forward?
I know that in previous time we have used the board reserve for specific program. I guess I'm asking as we go forward and we are approaching thinner and thinner amounts in that account, is there a procedural moment in which that gets used, or will it always be for specific program?
Well, I suppose we could use it to shore us up if we wanted to. I mean, is that what you're getting at?
In the past, I think the one time I remember really dipping into this was the roof at Issaquah Middle School.
Well, we used it for the kindergarten.
Right?
We opened kindergarten. We made.
So I'm just.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it could also be a catastrophic
Right.
loss or
That really
Mhm.
was the original purpose, but I think having to shut down things, all that was going on, it did have to be used. But I think we take action when that is used.
We did take action to use the board
And
emergency
I think
reserve.
that's really, so it could be for a variety
Mhm.
of reasons that we might need to dip into that. But that's going to be your emergency fund.
we got all kinds of emergencies. That's why I guess.
Yeah. Don't we?
I'm just trying to clarify from any sort of freestanding procedural use, if there's something on the books, but no, we'd go forward, we'd evaluate emergency as it occurs. Okay, I just want to make sure I understand when we're gonna, when or if we have that conversation.
Well,
Because
the
before
problem,
there was a lot more cushion around it. So I guess now I'm
Right.
the
curious.
problem with using it to backfill operations is you use it and then you have to replenish it. So it doesn't buy you anything,
Not to the next year.
right?
Yeah.
It's
a momentary reserve for
Yeah.
that year, but once you
you
use
know,
it,
you can replace a roof, but then your next capital levy comes and you've got to put that $1 million back. So.
right, for the next year, we would have it. Yeah, I know, in regard to the question on number 9, where in the, all of these different, listings of our fund balance and how it's held does get very complicated between what was projected one year and then what becomes more of a final, or what we're now in this year, looking back at what that last year was. I have to admit, it gets very confusing to look at it. I did catch that, that 9 million reserve for school, because I thought, looking back at the prior guide to understanding the budget, it was only around 4.5 million. So, but again, it's like, which version at what time are we looking at this? Director Weaver, did you have something? I see you're pondering your button.
I am pondering, and I'm going back like 5 minutes ago to what Director Gallinger was saying about how we've sort of not really been explicit about the fact that we used the fund balance in our last year's finances. And as I read this, shall not expend more funds than have been received in the fiscal year, unless revenues are made available, blah, 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 including the use of fund balances. It seems to me that your evidence would be, this is the revenue we received. This is what we spent. These are the other revenues we received, and this is the fund balance we used. It seems like that would be your evidence. I mean, the detail of the fund balance is great. I got no problem with that. But I don't know, that seems more like what you would see. I don't know why we never thought of this before. I guess because we never dipped into
We've
fund balance.
never been so focused on our
We-
fund balance
Yeah.
and the drawdown of it.
Historically, our year, we would project a fund balance of 38 and it would end at 42.
Right.
We projected
You're
that
right.
balance of 42 and it would end at 44. So really, this is new territory for us. It was just the rapid speed by which the lack of ESSER dollars took us down.
Right.
Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with what's here, but I think we could be more explicit and more transparent about what we did.
Right, because the whole, our spend down of our fund balance was driven by our expenditures in response to COVID and trying to get our students back into the school, whether that meant we were hiring more teachers or more nurses or had supplies around the health response to COVID. And thankfully, we had the fund balance to use, because had we not had that, we wouldn't have been able to do any of those things. But the end result is once that money is expended and we did not receive ESSER dollars to backfill all of that, we're left in a position of continually declining fund balance. So I guess I will throw it out to the board. If you would like to try to have them recharacterize it and show it in a different way to have that information in there, we can do that and bring it back on the next one.
I was going to say, could we do that and maybe just bring it back on consent?
We could do that.
It could go that way. The board would see it. We'd go, yep, that scratches the itch, and we put it on consent.
What do you guys?
We don't torture Martin a second time.
I think we heard, I personally heard clearly the two fixes as Director Gallagher expressed around stating more explicitly the use of reserve funds to, as was in compliance with the direction given in the spring, representing the interpretation. I think, Martin, we can do that. And then the second part that I heard was around just cross-referencing the numbers in this chart here and making sure we're clear what we're referencing to at what point in time.
Mhm.
I believe those are fixes we can tackle. Is that what I think I heard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I
then-
really like what Director Weaver said about
I know everybody's going to be a doctor soon.
about the how she thought it would be mapped out. I think that actually would be a very clear way to follow, as long as those numbers you can reference where they came
Go.
from.
Right. Yeah.
Revenue, expense, use of funds, and then current balance.
And trying to show what I was getting was, like additional dollars that came from someplace else, because again, it goes back
Yeah,
to
we
like
did
that 8 million that you
Yeah.
didn't forecast because you didn't know. We didn't even know it when we were doing budgeting in the spring. And you said the fund balance would be, this number, but then all of a sudden it was much better. But it was much better with money we thought we were going to get this year.
Right.
So
It's in a different
really
fiscal
didn't-
year.
A different
Yeah, different fiscal year.
So it didn't really help us. We were always anticipating it. It was the timing of it, of which you did not know when it was coming. So therefore your projections weren't spot on because you didn't know, right? I mean, this is what I'm getting at. And so that's why the timing of all of these things makes it difficult. But the way Suzanne described it would separate that out in a sense, so that if that hadn't been there, how much the drawdown would have been. Or at least that's what I was trying to see out of the description.
I believe we can take a
at
next step
that.
at that and represent those two additional fixes. And as well as in the event, we'll place it on consent agenda for now. However, I know with board protocol, there's an opportunity to
Pull it.
pull it from consent agenda should there need to be some discussion. So we will plan for that and also be prepared for that need.
Right. And, as it comes out to the board on the agenda, if somebody just indicates in advance too, that they'd rather have a discussion about it, we just move it to the regular agenda in the first place to do that. So at this point, I think you could withdraw your motion
I withdraw my motion.
if the second agrees.
I agree.
Okay, so we'll have withdrawn the particular item, and we'll leave it to a couple of changes to help with, especially as we try to tell the financial story of the impact of COVID on the district, and then move to bring it forward in 2 weeks on the consent. Okay, good plan?
Thank you.
Okay, we can do that. Thank you both very much for all of this. And like you said, we kind of are in new territory trying to show something that we haven't had to show before.
Silly. Thank you. We'll bring back those modifications.
Thank you. All right, so that took care of that item. All right, now we are on to High school number 4 educational program update. This is just an update, so we don't need a motion to get us started, and I will turn it over to our superintendent.
Great, thank you. Executive Director and of high school, secondary schools, Andrea Zier is coming up to join and provide the detailed update here. But as I had shared at the last meeting, we were preparing to bring forward our approach for gathering input on high school 4 educational programming. And so with that, we want to continue to bring that forward for board input and discussion as well. And I'll turn over to Andrea.
Andrea Zier, Executive Director of High Schools. I'm just going to share just a little bit briefly about what we're going to use to inform our educational planning about high school 4. So first, I wanted to bring up the data sources that we already have at our disposal that we'll be using, both external and internal data. So some of that external data is things like research. So we've got research on best school design. So things like wide open hallways, natural light, things that we know work well. We also have some great research out there on like future job skills and like the profile of a graduate and things that we know that employers want for our students. And so to make sure our educational planning matches that. And then there's also just some really great research on student well-being and like sense of belonging. So making sure there's a rich variety of programs that students can find interest for themselves as they pursue what their post-high school plans are. There's also internal research earlier it was mentioned this evening about surveys. We have a lot of survey data. So we have a lot of student survey data around soft skills, around post-high school things, all of our senior exit surveys. We also have their college and career center data. So like, what are our careers that our students are most interested in? I actually pulled that data this summer and started looking at it from each of the high schools, and it's really interesting. So I could spend a lot of time on that. We also have course request information from our students from all of our high schools. Like, what are they most interested in the courses that we offer? What are the most popular courses? Things like that. And then we also have even things like data from Final Forms and club data, so around what activities and athletic programs our students are taking and participating in at our school. So we're going to use both external and internal data. But also we're going to get input from people right now. So we're going to be looking at things like universal feedback versus targeted. So some of the universal feedback we're going to do is with my wonderful partners in the communications department. We're going to launch a thought exchange for teachers, for other labor groups, for parents, for community members and alumni. But then we're also going to do, and this is the part I'm most excited about because I've already started a little bit on this, some targeted listening sessions with really small focus groups to really have some specific narrow lenses that we're looking at certain parts of programming. So for example, this summer I was able to meet with some CTE teachers to really start talking about specific CTE programs and how frameworks work and how facilities need to match those programs to serve our students. And that's when we started looking at some of the college and career survey data and looking at all the different CTE options and what we have in our schools already and what some of the areas that we might be missing within our district. So that would be an example of a small group where we do a listening session and really have some narrow and specific questions we'd be looking for around specific program designs. Other examples include things like even talking to LRC2 teachers and LRC2 families around those spaces. Talking to food service folks around food service spaces. So really having some intentional small group discussions with specific groups as we form the planning for those spaces. So I think that's pretty much it, other than wanting your feedback around some ideas for some of those targeted groups that you'd want to make sure are included and anything else around the current plan for some of these the information feedback we'll use with data and narrow and universal feedback.
All right. I see Director Mullings has her hand up.
So we have these wonderfully newly engaged student reps, who I think would be a good group. But also we had the group, and I don't remember what we ended up calling it, of all the young folks that were not selected, who still indicated they wanted to stay engaged in conversation with the district and how to improve it. And so my hope is that this would really be a great topic for that group, because we had some really bright people in that group as well.
Yep. So we officially named them the Student Advisory Group.
Student Advisory Group, wonderful.
And they're going to start meeting, I believe, my first meeting with them is either late September or early October. But yes, they're going to generate some things they want to talk about, but High School 4 is one of the things that I have on the list.
Awesome.
Very good. Okay.
I think it's really important from a focus group standpoint to talk with our industry partners And I think that we should think about this high school differently since it lives smack in the middle of our two biggest population centers. So I think we would be missing an opportunity if we don't have a focus group with Microsoft, with Swedish, with Costco, because this is a really unique opportunity to forge a partnership. When you look north in Lake Washington and the power of like their Tesla, like technology school, super important. And so even if we're building a comprehensive high school, building a program within a school that has that, like, this is where I hope we think differently about what it means to be a comprehensive high school. No different than the fact that the IB program essentially is a nested program within Skyline. Because different than an AP, it really is sort of this through line through your whole experience. And so I really think we could do that at this school and not have we'll always have transportation concerns in our district being 110 square miles, but certainly be less so than we would if it was located not where it is.
I will say just to that we have started a little bit of that work in that I know we already have some Swedish partners sitting on our CTE advisory board, and they've already been working a lot with Lisa Neighbors, our director of CTE, around like certified nursing CTE programs. So within the CTE lens, some of those conversations have started, but I'm happy to make sure that happens more broadly.
Director Moraldo.
I think I was thinking along those same lines of what kind of specific, almost magnet program might be a good fit for there. And then taking a look, not just at high school 4, but are there gaps in our other high schools? Is there a way now that we've shrunk, we will have shrunk them to approximately the same size, you no longer as restricted. Transportation will always be an issue, but you're not as restricted in, we can't send students to that school to do that program because there's just not room. And is there a way we can think more broadly? We know that Issaquah High has a really strong sports medicine program. I don't know what it is down at Liberty. I still don't understand why it's not a partnership with Boeing. So the kids can go straight from Boeing, straight from high school to working at Boeing. Because I think it's right there. It is literally like 10 minutes away. But then what can we be doing at this high school with the fresh slate of the building's not necessarily designed on the inside? What can we put in there that could really incorporate something that will give students a career beyond here? Whether it's through a college line or not, ultimately what we want our students to be is responsible members of society. And a lot of that is paying bills. So what are we doing to get them to a point that they're actually able to get a job, whether it's right after school or 4, 5, 6 years afterwards? What can we do to be supporting that? And what kind of specific program can we get gearing towards there? So I appreciate that work, and really, what does that need to look like?
Yeah, and I appreciated you, mentioned thinking about the careers in the future, right? Because really some of the jobs these students will have are still being created by the time they're there. And so really having that future career thinking as an opportunity for students will be good. Any others? Does that help you?
That is great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
We'll be excited to be along on this journey with you and getting regular feedback. So we'll know what's going on. All right. Thank you. Okay, we're on to legislative matters, so we can try to catch up and get us out of here.
I have no updates other than planning on setting up meetings with our legislators. And then our next meeting, if you block out a little bit more time, because we're going to need to review the WASDA help us prioritize for the General Assembly. And since that was fresh in my mind from reviewing all of our policies,
right,
which specifically call out that first meeting in September that we do that. So if you make sure to block it in. And then if you guys, Diane, would hyperlink that section of the WASDA handbook for General Assembly, just those few pages for it so we can have it.
And I sent you the email. Okay, if you need anything else, let me know. But that seemed like that email would get you the credentials for General Assembly. And I also noticed, and this isn't necessarily legislative, but it is WASDA. We got an email about the WASDA elections. We got where the nominations for the position. So we're also doing the board members now this way versus, didn't we used to do it at annual conference in our caucus type room? Okay, so
Everything is different and
Everything is
ahead of
different.
time, and because we're not doing fall regional meetings, except DA2 is going to be rogue, and we're actually going to have a fall regional meeting that is going to be hosted at Highline.
do we have a
in
date for
October.
that yet?
It's tentatively looking like October 12th, but it's not set.
Okay.
Sorry, DA2 is going rogue. Is that what you said? Cool.
We believe in more togetherness than other regions.
All right. So what I pulled out from that email was that the filing window is through September 16th. If you want to put in for, president, vice president, if it was the right side of the mountains, I don't remember which it said. And for being on the WASDA board and Ledge committee and nominating committee and WIAA. So anyway, and then we would,
Resolutions, don't forget.
don't forget resolutions, that one too. And then,
Harlan, are you at the end of your term or are you still going?
they don't list who, it was very interesting. They did list what positions are up or available, but I don't remember how specific. And it's going to be interesting because you can click on a link to go to who's filed. And it's supposed to be updated throughout the filing window.
I think it is my seat would be my best guess, because I think Christine was selected, Christine Chu from Bellevue last year. It's just weird. COVID timeframe just mixed. I mean, just made my, usually I could remember
your term
all the
expires
conferences.
this year. So
Right.
yes, it's yours.
But
So you'll be filing soon?
I guess I need to.
I was going to say, better pay attention. And if you're going to, do it, let's get in there and file quickly.
We can't vote for you if you don't file.
There you go. So anyway, I had just read that email and thought that was interesting. Okay. Are any other announcements and correspondence to list?
I just sent one to Diane earlier today.
Okay, good. Got it. All right. We are on to calendar and future agenda topics. First, I wanted to bring up the PTSA leadership meeting with our superintendent. Suzanne has usually volunteered to be that person. It's, one time per month where the PTA president or their leadership and a board member meets with our superintendent. So would anybody else like to do it, or Suzanne seems to be volunteering or said she'd do it again?
I am happy to continue, but I don't want to hog all the fun.
Okay, we all give you the thumbs up.
We do by board consensus.
So this is our
Something that
consensus. So we will reassign Suzanne. Okay. And then you are all working on your Board of Distinction essays, which you're trying to have back to me by August 31st. And I had sent out the link related to the self-assessment. If anybody hasn't done it, try to do it by tomorrow. And then they'll pull the data for me, but I will check and make sure everybody's done it. So keep that on your agenda for tomorrow or Monday if you haven't already done it.
I'll have magic code words.
Yes, I know. We have a magic code word. So I may come back and say, who are you on the magic code word? And okay, then one other thing, we may just have to do this by a doodle. We were working on our town hall date. Harlan did send me some dates, and I ended up figuring out that those wouldn't work because they are some of our Jewish holidays. And so, and then other day that worked was also a day that our superintendent is aiming to do a community forum. So we're still looking for dates. And I was asking Harlan if he had any availability that very first week of November. I'm sorry. Yes, November. Did you have anything? And this would be for all of you. I was trying to work with Harlan to kind of target a few dates to then pass out to everybody else. But the dates he had suggested didn't end up working.
Well, Halloween's a bad idea.
No, I know. So we're really looking at November 1st, 2nd, 3rd.
3rd.
I can do the 3rd after 5:30.
Yeah, it would be an evening.
I can do the 3rd.
Actually, after 6 would be good. So however.
Yeah, it'd be
7
like,
is-
we've done it at
Perfect.
7.
It's when we
It's
use-
been our normal time.
There's an
oh.
ISF event
Oh,
also that night.
what is
being
their
held.
event?
It's ISF event in lieu of Dinner of Champions. That's the line that I have.
Oh, yeah, we don't. we
The
can't
Dinner
do
of
that night
Champions.
then. Yeah,
It's the,
that. Yeah.
there,
Okay.
well, there are 2 holds actually, so we can
Oh.
clarify this. It's, I believe, November 2nd and November 3rd that are both being held, so we can identify
Oh, okay.
which date it is, and then if it's the 3rd, if it's not the 3rd,
Right.
that sounds like that's the date that could work. Is that what I'm understanding?
Okay, we're down to Sydney because, okay, so November 3rd works for all board members. So for right this minute, just put,
And November 2nd, I could do as long as it's again at 7 o'clock or later.
oh, so you could do the 2nd. How about everybody else on the 2nd? Later. Oh,
Later.
later. So 7 PM.
So 7 PM start, you're good with on the 2nd.
So Marnie, are you good on the 2nd? And now Suzanne's good? Okay, so both of you, or all of you, put both dates on your calendar to hold. And I will work quickly to try to figure out what ISF is doing.
Great.
And
So we'll
and
just take the one they're not.
we'll
doing.
take the one they're not. So so now we have the date of our first town hall. It'll either be November 2nd or 3rd. We're not calendaring it, that kind of thing. We're just holding those 2 dates.
And this would be South End?
That could be the second one. I think that I really like your suggestion. I think that the first one should be the last week of September.
Well, I won't be here the
I know,
last
if
week.
we-
of
if we can't
September.
all be
We
there,
won't be
we-
here,
I
but you 3
know.
could do it if y'all wanted to.
If we are,
Wait. Oh,
What?
wait, if you're not going to be there and he can't be there?
The last week of September.
no,
We'll
yeah.
do it with just 3 of us.
I'm just saying you guys may need to find a date because I thought my takeaway from the retreat was we were going to get 2 dates in
We were.
before.
We were.
It doesn't
Winter.
look good unless the 3 are willing to do it all by themselves.
Right.
But Sydney really likes them, so she could run it. And then the November 2nd, 3rd could be our second one. I mean, I'm fine with that, but it can't be but the last week of September, I don't know if we're still running into
Curriculum nights.
curriculum nights.
There was a desire to sort of stay away from September in general. But I don't know if you wanted to look at December. Did you decide that December was off the table?
Well, the very first week right after the Thanksgiving would be another time, November.
Which is
20
really the end of November. You're
Yeah,
talking about the
yeah, so November
28th?
28, 29, 30,
I know I'm gone.
you're gone then. Okay, so we can't do that week. And then the next week, the 5th, 6th, 7th, and then we have a board meeting on the 8th.
Yeah, if we're trying to fit them in, certainly probably that first or that second week of December on the week of our board meeting. I could probably do.
What
Could
was
do, yeah.
wrong with the first week of October?
So part of the first week of October has the Jewish holidays.
Oh, I'm sorry, it did.
And
Yes,
that's,
yes,
we were
yes, you're
we were
right.
looking at October 5th and then I looked at the
Yeah,
calendar and
no,
realized
I
that.
missed
So
that, yeah.
so maybe October 6th would be beyond, but I would have to go back to that calendar to see the full range of dates. I just knew the
Yeah.
5th didn't work and they were multiple day holidays.
I cannot do the 6th. I will be on a plane to Alaska.
Oh, that sounds
Ooh.
fun. So then we're back to, we're avoiding
It's the NSBA
September,
regional meeting.
the
I
beginning
don't
of
know if you wanna
October
go.
didn't work. Another, I don't know if I don't know if it matters if they're too close to each other. It's more because we're targeting different areas. Right? If we're, right, that's where I'm going. Is we'll do one November 2nd and 3rd or 3rd, whichever one works out as one of them. And the other one, if there was a date to throw out, I'm gone I'm not available the 3rd week of October.
I think the only benefit of spacing them out is we definitely get a different feel just by virtue of what the contemporary issues are.
At the time.
Right. I mean, so it was definitely in September was very like COVID opening
Right.
schools. And in the spring.
It was always
very-
about something.
It
And it
was.
was different.
Safety and security was.
Oh,
the
yeah, that's
middle
right.
one.
Yeah.
So.
What about the week of the 17th in October?
Well, so Heather
Oh.
is doing, is trying to do a community engagement type thing around 1920. So that starts to put a lot of things in the same week.
Yeah.
Unless you, I mean, yeah, because on that you could be drawing from some of the same audience wherever you are and you don't want to do that. So
Dare I revisit that we should only do two? Just one. Last time my proposal was different. Last time my proposal was one in person, one remote. This time, how about we just do two total, both in person? And do the second one after
in
the,
like January,
in January. I'm just one more time on that one.
I can do that.
Our lives are the remote one.
Leave it to see. Well, I think at this point, let's just go with November 2nd and 3rd and do one in this phase. And I will let you know which one of those two dates.
And where and which.
Yes,
segment?
yes.
We-
Yeah, we
I might
did try to
which
talk
segment
about
of the
trying to do
district.
the south end first, but then,
Yeah.
so that, but we have to see whether their
would-
library, their space is available.
I would do the south end first because we did the south end first last year, so.
No, we did
it's-
Issaquah first last year.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. We most recently were in the north end. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
would hate to
Go back to the
repeat
north
the
end.
north end. I think the
Yes.
south end would be
Yeah.
better. And yes, I do remember saying Maywood would be nice if we could get it. Yeah.
Right, so
And before you
Maywood
talk
would-
to the foundation, maybe it'd be helpful if you knew what their availability was
I'll
in
do that
Maywood.
first.
Because if they also only
if
did
they,
one day.
if they have any, if I have any kind of influence on it, that will be working on this tomorrow.
Well, but at least now we're not trying to influence the foundation. We're just trying to pin them down.
Well, or, you know, if one of the
'Cause we
dates
don't
work better
care
for
which
us.
date.
No, we
Do
do.
we?
If the bit, it depends on what's available for the space.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry.
That's what we're gonna check on. Okay, so
Our team is prepared for middle school as a venue in the libraries. So
yeah,
we just need the dates to
yeah,
check.
to figure it out. Okay, we can do that. And then, like I said, one of the last things that had come up during our retreat had been this idea of board videos. But I really need some other board member to spearhead that. You want to spearhead that? Okay, Harlan's gonna spearhead that. That's good. I can't take on any more things on my plate that's already falling off. All right, then that was all the items I had on my section there. Does anybody else have anything else that we needed to have done? No, we're all good. Nobody else has anything else? All right, then I will adjourn at 8:37.